In Splunk, reports are saved searches that we can schedule to run periodically or on demand. And they're used to gather and visualize data or statistics from events over time. And they can help provide us as analysts or our teams with insights into trends and patterns or anomalies. And when we generate or create reports, we can include things like tables and charts and other visualizations or statistics like the ones that we've been running to help us or anyone we share the reports to understand the data better. And so as a very simple example, let's generate the same IP location map that we did in the previous lesson. And so I'm going to head over to the Search and Reporting app. And from here, I'm going to build out my query. And so I'm going to select the index of http_sample. Next, I'm going to pipe this to the IP location command and select the client IP field for the actual field of the IP addresses. And then next, I'm going to run the geostats command to do a count by the country field. And for example's sake, make sure your time range here is set to all time. And now let's run this. And in a more realistic scenario, we might want to limit the time range to, say, the past month or the past quarter. But obviously, since we're using pre-generated data here, well, we can't do that. And so if we have a nice visualization or a set of results that we want to share with other analysts or colleagues within the SOC, or even outside of the SOC as well, we can easily save this query and the results to a report. And it's just quite literally as simple as clicking on the Save As menu at the top here and selecting Report. And within this dialog box, we can enter a title for a report and an optional description. And note, it's best practice for an organization to define their own naming convention for these reports. And so typically a good recommendation is to name reports based off of the group the report is for, as well as the type of object it is, and a short description about what the report contains. And so instead of this title example here, we could call it something like security _report _ and then call it request by country. And next, we can select the content display type. And so we can choose if we want to display it in this map or this geo-based visualization, or something like a table. And so in this case, I'll leave it as cluster map here. And we can also select whether we want to display a time range picker or not. And so for anyone who runs the report, are they able to actually change the date range? And so in this case, it doesn't really matter, and so I'll just say yes here. And then after we're done, I'm just going to click on Save. And now that our report's saved and created, well, we can click on View here to preview it. Awesome. And so this looks good to me. And notice that we have the time range here since we enabled it. And so if we had consistent data coming in, we could modify this report to pull back the time range relevant to what we're looking for. And so, if I go up to the Reports tab in our app bar here, well, we can see a list of all of the different reports in our instance. And so we can see a number of default reports that ship with Splunk for management and such. However, we can also see our report second from the bottom. And so we can click on the Info button here to view the details of our report. We can click on it to manually run the report. We can also click on Edit here to edit various attributes or features about the report as well. For example, we can edit the permissions. Because by default, when a report is created, the permission settings are only set so only the owner or the creator of the report can view it. And so if I change this over to App, well, then all other users that have access to the Search and Reporting app can view it. We can also give individual access based on various user permissions, like read and write access, say, to everyone. It's also important to note that reports are typically set to be run at certain time intervals, and we can do that by scheduling the report. And so if I go under Edit here, and under Edit Schedule, well, we can check off the Schedule Report button here. And setting a schedule like this within any SIM is best practice for our reports or queries, as we can schedule when the SIM runs a heavy search query, or a report that pulls back a lot of data, which can very much reduce the resource strain on our system. And particularly, this is useful when a report is shared with a number of users, or embedded within a dashboard that many users access. And so instead of running the report ad hoc whenever a user navigates to it or sees it in their dashboard, well, we can schedule it to run, say, once a day or once an hour, depending on what the report is, and have the results aggregated and ready to go for the morning. And so under time range here, well, we can select a report to run every hour, or day, or week, or month. And we can even select a custom cron schedule as well. And it's also useful to note that we can trigger actions as well when the report runs. And so if I click on Add Actions here, we can see different triggers, like sending the results to a webhook or through email, which is also very common. Now let's move on to talk about alerts. And so in Splunk, alerts are notifications that are triggered by specific conditions or thresholds within our data. And so we can use alerts to monitor and respond to important events or anomalies in real time. And typically, alerts are made up of 3 different parts. And so we have trigger conditions, and these are based on the actual search queries that are triggered when certain conditions are met. And so we can base these off of thresholds or anomalies, or even specific patterns within the data. We also have the alert scheduling, so whether it's real-time or scheduled. And lastly, we have the alert actions, and so when an alert is triggered, well, we can configure various actions to be performed, like send out email notifications, or reach out to a webhook, or create an incident within an external ticketing system, or just log the event to our dashboard. And so alerts start off obviously with defining the actual criteria, or in this case the search query. So in other words, what kind of activity are we trying to monitor and alert for? And so this could be things like a high number of failed login attempts within a short period, or specific configuration changes, or things like impossible travel, or even web-based attacks as well. Right? And so we talked a lot about indicators and things to monitor for previously. So in this case, within our sample Apache logs, let's create an alert that will trigger if any LFI attacks are detected. And so to do this, let's just create our search criteria. And so I'm going to specify the index of http_sample. And next, I'm going to pipe this over to a subsearch command. And in this case, I'm going to target the URI query field. And specifically, I'm going to look for a pattern within that field's value. And what I'm going to search for is within wildcards here. And then I'm going to search for %2e with another %2e, and then lastly with a %2f. And if you remember, this is the URL encoded data for the .. which is a common pattern found within LFI attacks. And so let's run this, and we should actually get some results as long as we change our time range here to all time. And you can see we're matching 2 different results, because again, they have that URL encoded data. And obviously we can make this a more sophisticated pattern and include other patterns as well, but this is just for a simple example. And so once we've identified and tested out our alert query, well, we can click on Save As again. And this time we can go down to Alert. And we'll be given a number of different options to set up our alert. And so for the title here, I'm just going to call it something simple like alert_LFI detection. I'll leave description as optional. Under the alert type here, well, you can see we have either scheduled or real time. And so this will define how often Splunk will search this query and pull back events to see if any activity or events match our conditions. And so the schedule option here will run at set intervals. Or we could use real time, as the name suggests, to look for any activity in real time, which is what a lot of these rules like this will use. And so I'll leave it on real time. Under the trigger conditions here, well, we have a number of options. And the option we pick kind of depends on the type of condition or the query that we've defined. For example, if we're alerting on login failures, well, we might want to bump up the number of events, or the threshold here, so we're not flooded with a number of alerts anytime a legitimate user typos their password, because I know I do that all the time. And so we could use the number of results here to trigger something like 5 or more. For our case, let's get alerted anytime we identify an LFI string or pattern, and mark it as per result. And lastly, we have alert actions, which again, this is so important because it determines what actually happens when the alert triggers. Right? And so we can send an email or run a script, or send the alert out to a webhook like Slack, for example. Or we can just add the alert to the built-in alert queue for analysts to triage and investigate. And so since we're just demonstrating the feature here, let's just click on Add to Triggered Alerts. And in this case, we can select the severity, and we can go all the way from info all the way to critical. I'm just going to leave it at medium. And I'm just going to hit save. And I'll just exit out of this. And now we can head over to activity in the top Splunk bar here and go under triggered alerts. And if we had an incoming stream of logs, and if one of those events matched our query, well, this is where we would find an instance of our newly created alert. And so obviously, because we're using predefined logs, well, we can't really generate any real-time alerts. This was just to showcase the general process for setting up and creating an alert.